The difference on the speed you go is how clear and how quickly you're making decisions around what you're doing. If you understand that context, then you can start thinking through, well, what does that really mean for my business model? And what do I need to add in value? Your mindset flips to business first, technology second. And data's the fuel of AI. You can't do much if you don't have data to put in it. So a lot of people talk about three of those, people, process and technology, but I like to have the data because it's absolutely critical.
Hey, welcome to another episode of GCC Tech Talks, where we sit down with business and transformation leaders in the region, unpicking nuggets of information so our listeners can understand what it takes to really drive technology and transformation change within small and large organizations. I'm your co-host, Tom Stroud, and I'm joined again by my other co-host, Sye.
Hey, everyone.
How's it going?
Very well, thank you.
I'm looking forward to the F1 that's happening this weekend.
Yeah, it's gonna be eventful, I think. I just don't want the horrors of the Lewis drama again.
Yeah, let's not talk about that.
Let's not talk about that, all right?
Today we've got quite an exciting one. We're joined by a transformation leader who has spent 35 years working with organizations on multi-billion-dollar transformations, come from an IT background, but now advises CEOs to navigate the trenches of kind of digitalization, IT transformation, M&A, and I'm sure we'll get into some more stories around what he does. And we're joined by Richard. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Sye. Great to be here.
Good. So before we get into the business end, which I'm sure you've got a fountain of knowledge, who is Richard? Kind of how long have you been in the region? I kind of mentioned you from an IT background, but a little bit about yourself and what brought you to Dubai.
Yeah, so been here coming up to 4 years. Was in London before that. Worked in London most of my career. Came here as a CTO of one of the biggest regional businesses. So that's what brought me here, I guess. Left there and then I've set up my own business now. So yeah, decided to stay and I'm really enjoying it.
Not hooked by the weather.
Yes. It's nice to have sun
Yes.
all year round, that's for sure.
Definitely. So what is it that you do now then, if you want to kind of give a brief?
So the way I describe it is I'm a thought partner to CEOs,
Okay.
helping them navigate through the modern world of decisions, getting clarity, making decisions, making sure they make the right decisions as they move forward, particularly as everything's speeding up in the age of AI, as you mentioned. It's very important to make sure you make the right decisions, not the wrong ones, or at least less of the wrong ones, because that's what can give you competitive advantage. So that's what I help with.
Cool.
And I guess going back to your background a little bit, did you think you were going to go into IT as a young lad? Was that kind of the approach? Did you fall into it? And maybe where is your skill set originally?
Yeah, I mean, what I knew, I guess, when I started my career was I wanted to be in business, bigger business. That's about all I knew. I think I fell into my first role was analytical, sort of analysing the business. You call it a business analyst.
Okay.
And I enjoyed being on the business side of technology. That evolved into doing some project management and then
Enjoyed it or hated it?
No, really enjoyed it.
Okay.
I mean, I think what I realised is, so I was working for an insurance company at that point, and I had a year where I was out of technology into the business. I was an underwriter for a year. Whilst I enjoyed that, a bit different. Whilst I enjoyed that for a year, I didn't enjoy the fact that nothing really changed. It was a very sort of static place to be. So I realised that what I like doing is changing businesses, not just running them, if you like.
Okay.
This gives you a nice perspective, both sides of the fence, right? You know, you've learnt the business, you know how it operates, you know what those end users kind of expecting from systems and processes. And then, applying that into the IT role, building up your skill set there has probably elevated to where you are now on, navigating big change.
Yeah, I mean, I've been through a journey. I think you start in technology, you're thinking, just really about the technology. And then as you go through your career and you become more senior, you're more and more thinking about the business. And then at some point, I think particularly when you get to CIO level, your mindset flips to business first, technology second. It has to. You cannot be sitting there just thinking about technology. You've got to think about the business first. It's all about adding value to the business. I happen to have my hand on the technology lever, so that's what I use. But, what can I do to take this business forward? So that's a different mindset.
And are you now trying to keep a pulse on technology, or are you focused purely on, what are the strategic objectives of that organization? What are the top level KPIs, and then working with those executives to put plans in place? Do you then have to still be sort of au fait with what technology is out there? How does that all work?
Yeah, I mean, I keep abreast broadly of technology, not going into a lot of detail because that's not the highest value, I don't think. But it's really with a business understanding what their business model is, where their value comes from their customers, and where the market's moving to, what moves they need to make to stay competitive and become even more competitive, and how can technology enable that. That's kind of what I look at.
I don't know about you, but it's I think kind of the paradigm between the smaller companies coming into the region and those large organizations. I'm seeing a lot now with the work that we do, where you've got big conglomerates that are, trying to catch up with this new wave of transformation that's going on, whether that is just digitalizing processes, whether that is, trying to jump on the bandwagon of AI and using that as a competitive advantage, and now sometimes struggling to compete with the smaller businesses that can kind of navigate those really quickly. I'd love to kind of get, how you think about that when you're working with these organizations, comparing from a large down to maybe, I don't know if you work with smaller and startups at all.
Well, I mean, technology over time becomes commoditized, so people can have access to the technology. The difference, I think, on the speed you go is how clear and how quickly you're making decisions around what you're doing. So I do think the biggest leverage is still leadership, and it's the clarity of leadership and the clarity of decisions. And I've seen that throughout my career. If you think about just business transformation, digital transformation, what makes a successful one versus one that doesn't go so well, it's usually the clarity and the speed of decisions to keep the momentum and keep things moving forward. So that's what I'm kind of focused on, I think. Yeah.
So the leaders, you touch upon the leadership. Is there any other aspects that they need to think about when they're driving such big changes in such big organizations?
Yes, I mean, the classic thing I like to talk about is what are we actually changing? Because it's very common to focus on the technology, so we change the tech. I've had that so many times, change the tech. Well, actually, changing the technology on its own doesn't normally achieve anything. What you're trying to do when you're changing an organization, change the capability in an organization. And for me, capability consists of 4 things, which is people, process, data, and technology. A lot of people talk about 3 of those, people, process, and technology, but I like to have the data because it's absolutely critical. So you're trying to get all those 4 working together and getting those changed in an organization. That's how you really kind of move the organization forward. And I think the most difficult one and the most important one is the people. It always is, because the value you create from technology will only go as fast as the people adoption of that technology, and you have to take the people on the journey. And that's the thing that often I see people don't focus enough on. So it's probably the thing that I've focused more on, because I've realized that's the thing that can hold you back or speed you forward.
Do you know, we're seeing a common trend. So like the last couple of podcasts we've been doing, I don't think the emphasis on people is enough And I think that's where people like you come in, to emphasize what's really, really important in a transformational drive. One of the things I was going to touch upon as well is, have you come across a situation, and I'm putting you on the spot here, have you come across a situation where you were going on this transformational change and you had all the right, tools in your box, shall we say, but the people just weren't budging? How did you go about, changing their mindset, shall we say?
Yeah, I've seen, you see patterns throughout your career, and I think a common pattern I've seen is technology being put in, and then over the years it being changed, or in tech language customized, to the way people want it to work, right? And you often see over 5, 10, 15 years, there's so many customizations being built up in the system that it makes it virtually impossible to upgrade, to change. And if you need to do something, you're talking about a re-implementation. So I think that happens because there isn't the right balance between understanding the real value of needing to change something, technology, and the value of staying with the processes already embedded in the technology. And that requires a kind of fine thinking. Often a business can just do what its users want to do, which is just, let's change it, let's follow the process I've always known, that's what I think works. But that ends up in a very expensive and inflexible situation for a business. So I think that's a common pattern I've seen that you need to be careful of.
And what do you believe is the best way to kind of make people realise, see the light?
I think it's looking, well, one thing is looking at the life cycle of any technology investment. Often you do a business case, it's about how much is it going to cost to put in, maybe the first 1 or 2 years running costs, and versus the benefit. But actually, most of these technology, if I take an ERP, a lot of ERPs, and it's no different in this region, have been in businesses 10 years, 15 years is not uncommon, sometimes 20 years. What is the cost of running that over that period if you take the right approach versus the wrong approach? So I think that's definitely one thing boards should look at more carefully rather than just the in-the-moment decision.
Okay. And just touch upon that point. If you've gone in the wrong direction, if say, for example, you were going down this journey of implementing a new ERP solution, and you've done all the background work, you've started the implementation, you've had it for 1.5, 2 years. At what point do you realise, hang on a minute, we've gone in the wrong direction, the wrong direction, and we need to now steer in a different direction, or think to ourselves and admit to ourselves that it was the wrong direction, and we need to reevaluate what we actually got out of this implementing this tool.
Yeah, or do we pull the plug at that stage and start? I feel like a lot of CEOs probably call Richard at that point and go,
Yeah, I've seen this situation a lot of times. I think it's true, not just of technology, it's all capital projects. Once you get so far down the line, it's a hard decision to pull it, but it may be the right one. I think something I've always liked to do, I think I'll go back again to business case, because I'm always looking at the business value of a technology investment. It can be quite common to do the business case once up front when you're making the investment decision and then forget about it. But a true business case is a living document that should be constantly updated, because new information is coming to light all the time. The costs change, the benefits change, the business environment changes, the priorities of a business change. So you have to kind of reevaluate. And you have to at some point say, well, actually, this doesn't make sense on the current path anymore. Let's pause, let's stop, let's reevaluate. Let's either just tweak it, pivot, or perhaps stop completely. I think a good technology leader is not afraid to put those decisions on the table. It's not about blaming. It's not about, wrong. It destroys more value in a business to keep going than it does to stop and write off the money you've already spent. So, if you're a business person, you're all about how do I maximize value, and that's the equation you need to have. So
yeah, I think that's what I was trying to kind of point out to our viewers. There's no right or wrong answer. It's all about is it working right now? 2 years ago it was working. That value was there. We could see it. A year later, yes, maybe not. And to put up your hands and say, right, we've gone in the wrong direction, and then restart again or adjust, shall we say, your journey, is probably the best way to go about things, rather than try and bury your head.
Completely.
In the
Another
sands.
example of that, we talk about ERP, but is outsourcing.
Yes.
I mean, there was a big trend to outsource, and then maybe a bit more insourcing. That's gone throughout my career. That's gone like this. I think I've always felt with outsourcing, don't be ideological about it. Be pragmatic, and distinguish what outcome you really. Because outsourcing is just a means to an end. What is the end you want? Do you want to be really? What are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for speed, or are you optimizing for cost, or something else? Because if you're optimizing for speed, then you want to keep things generally, I'm generalizing, it's different in every situation, you want to keep things as close to you as possible because you can change them faster.
Yeah.
Got more control at that point.
Yeah, but it does depend on what you're trying to achieve. So,
How far ahead do you try and get boards to think about when going through a transformation? Because like you say, there's a lot of keeping up with the pace, and we want to deliver this because of X, Y, and Z. Do you take a step back and say, look, actually, what's the 5-10 year plan with going through this project, whether that's technology or something else? I
mean, yes, probably not 10 years these days. I think it's very difficult to see, but I think planning ahead is so important. I think the sweet spot is probably 3 to 5 years. I mean, a lot of people say, well, things change too fast, how can you? But on the other hand, technology takes a while to implement and to create value. So if you've got a business inflection point coming up in 2 years' time, and you've got to start planning now and getting on board. So I think it's important to sort of look that far out. There's no problem in changing the plan as you move forward, but at least you've got a plan, and then you just keep changing it and tweaking it. But I think back to some of the business I've worked for. I've laid out a 3-year plus plan of here's the roadmap of all the projects, all the programs we need in the sequence. We need to do them. And this is why, with the business cases for each of them. And then 6 months down the line, something's changed. Okay, so I'll go and reevaluate the plan, or resequence, take something out, add something new in. That's how I would do it.
Yeah. The business cases, I've seen a lot, and you would have seen this as well, where, and you touched on this, you've got a business, you've got an idea of a project, you build a business case, it gets signed off, you implement, and then there's no real referring back to it. And the board and the executive team are then putting a lot of pressure on the delivery team, saying, why isn't this happening? Without, those milestones referring back. Have you got any advice for leaders out there thinking about going through a big transformation, around how should they manage that business case? What kind of key milestones? And also, just dive a little bit into the people. How do you manage the people in a large organization through that process?
Yeah, I mean, business cases, I think, we all know that best practice, once you've implemented, is to go and do a post-implementation review and review against the business. But we all know that rarely happens. Why does it rarely happen? Because the teams are under so much pressure to deliver the next project that, so it's, I think one of the problems is, one of the challenges is, again, it goes back to the same root cause, I think, a lack of clarity and a lack of prioritization on what transformation projects are really important. I think often this goes back to the exec teams and the board, because people want their projects, but I always felt I was always the one as CTO bringing the trade-offs to the executive table and saying, we can, if we invest more money, but within the money envelope we've got, we need to decide between A and B, and this person on the exec team wants A, this person on the exec team wants B, but, we need to have a conversation and we need to agree for the business as a total what really is important, because, there's only one usually one investment pot for technology. There's usually one technology team. There can be multiple. Even so, there's still dependencies on one central team somewhere normally. So you have to make decisions and you have to prioritize. And I think doing that's really, really important, but often doesn't happen. And so I think the CIO, CTO role is important to go and have those business trade-off conversations, not just be an order taker. There's a tendency sometimes to, business board's made a decision, we need to go and implement. Well, if it doesn't make sense, you go back and you have a conversation, right? Because
Pushback.
Your job's there to add value to the organization. I think on the people side, so we came back, I talked earlier about people, process, data, technology. So, and often though, the team that you have to implement is sort of heavy on technology. You've got some data people, you've probably got some process business analysts, but you don't really have anyone on the people, which is a problem. So what I've certainly done before is have people in my team that are just change management specialists. All they do is they go out and do the people change management. And I've had resistance against that, particularly people say, well, why is that not in HR? And my answer is that's a different skill set to what HR do. HR may be able to do it in a particular organization, but often it's a particular skill set and you need that in your business change team to achieve the outcome you need. So, I think that's what you need is people focused on the people change. Yep. So doing the training, doing the playbooks, helping people through what they need to do differently in a role. Because when we do a business transformation project, we're often changing people's roles in the end business.
Yep.
And that's often not factored in or understood, and then we wonder why it doesn't quite work. Well, their roles change because of the capability process change we just made. So how do we manage that? Yeah.
I tend to see as well, when you bring in people to deal with the change management and the people, it ends up being a long-term role. CIOs, CTOs, even CEOs, they realise the value these people can bring. Mm-hmm. Because if I don't know about you guys, but if I look back in the last 10 years, it's constant change. Change is a constant, and those people that can adapt to those changes and adapt the people to those changes, they're so important within the business. And if you can. Obviously, small organisations won't be able to put those kind of people in place. They will probably have to, I don't know, maybe a program manager can multitask, shall we say, wear multiple hats, shall we say. But I want to touch upon slightly, if we take this same kind of process and we add requirements, like regulatory requirements, shall we say, what changes does that make towards decisions at board level, should we say? Because I know we've dealt with quite a few businesses here, and the regulatory change, I don't know about yourself, but the regulatory change sometimes used to dictate what the budget is actually spent on. Or part of the budget is spent on, or the tech debt budget partially is allocated to regulatory change. And how would you advise how to balance one with the other? So value on one side and meeting regulatory, obligations on the other side.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think when you're prioritizing which projects, which programs to invest in, you've got to look at a number of factors. One of which is this mandatory for the business to do, or is it optional, right? So in there's various methodologies like Moscow out there, but one of the top ones, obviously, if not the top one, is, are we regulated to do this in a certain way? Do we need to change our systems or our processes to meet that regulatory requirement? That's obviously going to go towards the top, probably at the top of the list. Obviously, you can always make decisions in business to not do that, but that's a board decision. But that would go at the top of the list, and then the more optional things would come. The more the business case judgment things would come next. That's how often I've done it. The whole subject we're touching on there is risk, actually. It's a whole nother area with technology where often I've seen companies sitting on a huge amount of risk, not even understanding what that risk is in technology. I'm only talking about the technology area, not the rest of the business.
Yeah.
But, so one of the things I've always done is trying to put together a risk register to identify all the risks, catalogue them, work out the impact and the probability of each of them. Then I can make an assessment on how important it is and where it ranks in the priorities to deal with. And then I'm working through that risk register, as risk debt to get rid of it over time.
I think that's what I was trying to lead you towards, as in you've got 100 risks, say for example. I was unfortunate to inherit over 100 risks when I joined an organisation in the UK.
They were the 100 you knew about anyway.
Yeah, those were the 100 I knew about. Yeah. And how I couldn't get my head around at the time. It was very, I would say, a new area for me. And I couldn't get my head around how to prioritise those risks. And you've given I eventually worked it out like you explained. But it's been highlighted several times, should we say, in conversations that I've had, especially in the last year. How do you prioritise which pieces of the risk register that you take on this year, which ones you can leave? And there's no right or wrong answer. I wouldn't say that. There's
I mean, it's a risk versus an impact versus probability assessment for each one. Then you can plot that on the grid and you can work out which are the highest. But then you've got to put that in the context of the risk appetite for the company.
Yep.
Some companies have they will state anyway, they have a very low risk appetite, to which my response as CEO would be, great, then I need this amount of money to solve all these risks so we're in line with your risk appetite, with our risk appetite. Others may be more sort of laissez-faire about it, which case you could take a bit more time. You've got to set it in the business context of how you're operating that business.
Yeah.
I think that comes on to probably some of the sectors you've worked in. I don't know if you want to tell the audience, some of the sectors, financial services and places like that. Where have you worked?
Yeah, so I started in financial services, hence the insurance experience earlier. Then I went to consumer goods for a large part of my career. Then I went to media and advertising.
Okay.
Then retail and hospitality. And then construction, real estate.
Okay.
I've also advised technology businesses, and now I'm also fractional COO, actually, so CTO, CIO, and then COO of a technology business. So yeah, covered quite a lot of ground. I'm pretty cross sector.
Yeah, which is good because it brings a lot of perspective. You get industries and organisations that only want to learn from their peers. But I think the companies that actually are open to absorbing ideas and ways of working from other industries can actually benefit a lot more. I don't know if there's any particular industries that you've worked in where you think that particular industry does things quite well and you can bring in to other sectors. Any perspective on which industry is kind of the most...
it's difficult to generalise because you are generalising and it's always unfair on some people, but obviously it tends to be the sectors that have invested the most in technology for the longest period of time, that obviously have become more mature. So you think financial services is a good example, right, where that's been a long journey of investing a lot. They've developed some very robust, mature ways of doing things. It's probably the example I would quote. But then there is a downside to that as well, because you can get a bit regimented in the way you do things. And you come back to your point about agile. You've got to be agile in the way you think and the way you operate technology as well. You can get stuck into this is the way we do it and we don't do it any other way. Well, hello, something new's come along. We need to think again. So,
if I cast my mind back in the UK when I was working for consultancies, you always had two hats: regulatory, non-regulatory. With regulatory, the project's going to take a long time because there's so many processes in place. There's a lot of I call them red stops and you need to turn them green before you go forward, shall we say. Whereas with non-regulatory, sometimes they move faster. And they can adapt to change and also adopt new technology a lot faster because the red tape isn't there, basically. But I also feel that with the regulatory organisations, because the regulatory requirements are so high, these rigorous, these procedures, processes have been put in place. It's to meet those regulatory requirements, and that's why their standards are so high as well. But I think the timeline to change is much greater, and I think most companies that are non-regulatory try and stay out of that kind of domain, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, I think what often happens is, and it's human nature, we look at things in isolation. We're looking at regulation or risk in isolation from everything else in that business or that sector, but everything's a trade-off. If you regulate a lot and you have a lot of compliance, that's inevitably going to be a trade-off on speed and on cost.
Yep.
Well, on the other end, if you're going super fast, keeping things, low cost, then you're probably not going to be, maybe not have a lot of regulation. So, where's the sweet spot and where's the right balance is a question for each sector. Yeah.
Probably moves us quite nicely onto, AI. The region is very primed for change. A lot of businesses are doing very well in trying to implement that. There are some organisations that don't quite grasp what it is but want it. And then you add sovereignty and governance and regulatory requirements around here. How are you advising, I guess, the CEOs that you're working with when it comes to we want to bring AI into an organisation? Because I assume that's probably forefront of a lot of your work at the minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think all CEOs or almost all CEOs are probably sitting there knowing they need to have AI in their business, and they should, because everyone's talking about it, everyone's expecting it. But knowing what and how to do it is another thing, right? And I think there's a lot of pressure to just deploy AI and just experiment and do stuff. Well, okay, you can learn that way, but I think it all comes back to the same point I was making earlier. AI is no different. It's the clarity of thinking at leadership level about where you can really add value to your business. And if you understand AI enough, and what's coming, and I'm not talking about large language models that everyone uses, I'm talking about agentic AI. I'm talking about what's actually going to change in the workforce in the next, let's say, 3 years, 5 years, the level of agent automation there can be, how that's going to affect the workforce of organizations and how organizations actually get work done. If you understand that context, assumed context because it's future, then you can start thinking through, well, what does that really mean for my business model? And what do I need to, where am I really going to be adding value versus not? And how do I get ahead and stay ahead of my competitors using all that? I think that's the smart move, is to think that through carefully and slow down, think it through, make some smart moves rather than just make any old moves because it's trendy,
Yeah, I think there's a lot, not just everywhere in the world, there's a tick box exercise going on where it's we are agentic, we've got AI, but they're spending loads of money on failed projects and consultancies because.
Well, I was going to say, what do you believe are the foundations that they, organisations need to put in for those projects to succeed? What are the enablers?
Well, everything always starts with people. So you first got to have people that understand current AI technology and future, where's it going, right? Because then you've got thinkers in the organisation that can think through that, combined with the business model of that business. And this is really where I help CEOs, right? Is I understand conceptually enough of the technology to see where it's going. I can sit down with the CEO, look at their business, understand their business model, put the two together and say, right, this is probably what you need to do. This is probably what's going to happen to your market. these are the moves and the plays you probably need to make to really get smart and get ahead, right? And these are the things you shouldn't be doing. I think, so to go back to your question, is to get the right people in the organisation, either external advisors or people internal that are thinking this through, and understanding what could change, and then making those moves. Basically, that's the first thing I would do.
And we come from a data background. I think I see a lot that just the fundamentals and the foundations of just the data, like having access to the right data, having the right platforms in place so that AI can go and leverage that data, whether it's internal or external, and putting the people, like you say, but it's not just bringing the people on the journey, but actually putting the right functional teams in place. I've had conversations where, the board and the CEOs said to the IT team, we need AI. And they start calling around a bunch of AI companies and consultancies asking what to do. The best one I've had, I've gone into a meeting with a construction company. You've got the group CEO that's telling me all about the different types of AI and where he wants them in the business and how it's going to drive his initiative. I'm like, well, I know which one's likely going to succeed because they're thinking about, okay, what are the business outcomes? How is that aligned to the strategic vision of the company? How does that fit into our organizational model where these agentic platforms are going to sit? What's the team that's going to look after it and support it? Where's the data coming from? And you think if the CEO's thinking about this is kind of the right level because, the buck stops with him at that point rather than asking someone in a technical role to go and figure it out. And when it doesn't figure it out, that person's then the one to blame.
Yeah, completely agree.
I think it's I think the people and the data. I think that those are the two core things that I feel are going to be the game changers for anyone. Having the right data, or collecting even the right data, should we say, along the journey. I think a lot of organisations are wanting to kind of implement as much automation as they can using agentic AI. I think the lack of I would say domain data within their organisation is probably not sufficient enough for them to do like the automation to the level they would like to do, should we say?
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you on that. I mentioned people because that's the first thing, but I go back to my model, people, process, data, technology.
Yeah, that's what I was going back to.
As I said earlier, the one that often people miss out is data.
Yeah.
And data's the fuel of AI, right? You can't do much if you don't have data to put in it. So I think whilst data's risen up the agenda for companies over the last 5-10 years, a lot of companies now have data teams. It's becoming even more important in the age of AI, and the focus on having, and when we talk about data, we can go really granular, right? We're talking about first, second, third-party data. I'm talking about first-party data, the data that you own yourself, that you generate, really having control of that, and then second-party data through your customers and suppliers, third-party data you might buy in the market. Having all of that orchestrated and understood and organised, clean, because a lot of data is dirty or missing. That in itself is a organisational asset that needs to be carefully nurtured and put together, because you can put these amazing, as you're saying, amazing AI systems in, but you go and execute and run them and they haven't got the data, that's going to do nothing. So
that's it. I think about this, just one example. You're looking at a business that wants to understand their state. What do you mean by that? How does an AI differentiate that between a state of a country, customer state, whether it's red, amber, green, and it's just having those definitions and access to the data and bringing in some of that structured, but also now we're in a world where people need unstructured data, semi-structured data. You think about HR policy handbook, I want to be able to run an AI chatbot so me as an employee can go in and ask, okay, how many sick days am I entitled to, and all these sorts of things. But there's more than just, okay, I've got a PDF, I need to stick it in and give access to everyone, because then you're opening up a world of potential liability. I think the Ford was a good example, or one of these companies where the chatbot was giving away cars for a really cheap price because they hadn't set up the data and the process and the policies in place.
Yeah, I think data is the key, but like you touched upon just now, just having the data is not enough. There has to be context around it. There has to be maybe a semantic layer. There has to be structure in the steps that you're taking from A to B to C, and then eventually putting it into an agentic solution. Also, I think as well, I don't believe that most projects that they say are failed are not failed. From what I've seen anyway, from what my evaluations have been. It's not failed. It's either the data is not the right data, the data is not in the right context, or they haven't got the right data yet. Because the way I see it, 9 times out of 10, if they use that solution, even though it's a bad solution, if they used it for a year, it would learn from you. And the more it learns from you, the more data it gains. And I wanted to kind of make that point to our audience as well. It's not, a failed project is not always a bad thing. It tells you where you're doing things wrong and where you can improve, basically.
Yeah. It's like a gap analysis, essentially.
Exactly.
It's an expensive gap analysis.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good philosophy to have in life, right? I mean, there's no such thing as failure. It's just feedback from which you can use to improve. And we all learn more from failure than we do success. So, yeah, I mean, that's the attitude you need to have. You just need to be smart enough to course correct quickly enough and not let it go too long, as we were talking earlier. I think that's
I think I think some of the things that we really want our viewers to take away from some of these sessions that we're having is that thought process around, you go down a direction, you realize that you've maybe gone slightly off track, maybe you've gone totally in the wrong direction, but correcting your journey is the appropriate thing to do, and it's the right thing to do. God knows how many times I put my hands up to like a CIO and said, guys, I've really messed up here, but I've never gone to him with that hand up without 3 solutions that he can pick from. I think that's an important message that I want to get across.
We see it. Like, we're always on LinkedIn. You always hit LinkedIn it's a great networking platform, but what it does is just accentuate all the wonderful things that are going on in business in the world.
Yep.
But most importantly, you're learning from your failed projects and when you're not getting things right. And it's the important, how do you course correct at that moment in time, and then learn from that and lean into it as a learning experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think I focus on this a lot now because I post every day on LinkedIn, and it's value content around what I've learned in my career and what to do, what not to do. Because I think it's important to sort of take those learnings and share them, because otherwise they're kind of wasted, right? I mean, you want to help people, so.
You definitely take out the right job now. The right job now. I would say that for sure.
Yeah.
Ooh, question for you. What's your, outside of business, what's your favourite bit of technology at the minute? Or, what should young people be thinking about learning?
Probably spend more time off the technology, maybe. But I don't. Well, obviously, my phone is probably the thing I interact with more than anything else. But within that, I think if we talk about GPTs, I've really got into using GPTs as a thought partner. So, one thing I've done is created a custom GPT. So my business is called Value Mastered. As I said, advisory to CEOs, helping CEOs, and we do fractional work as well. But, to me, help think through what I need to do in the business. I've created a custom GPT that knows everything about my ideal clients, my products, my services, my brand philosophies, etc. So that when I want to do something or think about something, I ask it, and it will say, yes, you need to do this, but don't do that, right? So that kind of stuff really helps you speed up your thinking. So I think that's something I'm really into at the moment, kind of as a project, is really using that.
So a bit of advice for the listeners then.
Yeah.
Get into your GPTs and...
But your custom GPT, just for you.
Custom
You can
GPTs.
Do one for your business, you can do one for you personally, you can do one for
your family, one for your kids.
Yeah, be careful with the family one.
What does a fractional exec advisor mean? You know, how does one kind of get in touch with you? You know, if someone wanted to, I guess, partake in some of your services, what is it that you exactly offer, and how does it all work?
Yeah, I mean, fractional is just part-time executive, but I think it's intervention, right? Because if you're going in, often it's a business where they don't have that role. So again, CIO, CTO as an example, COO, they're an SME, they don't have that role, or maybe that role is vacant at the moment, but they need some help. It's going in on a part-time basis, particularly with experience, and helping them really move that function or that area forward in terms of thinking, plans, execution, bringing all that experience in. That's what I like to do. So really, help CEOs plug the gap and move the organisation forward. I mean, LinkedIn's the best way to find me. Richard Steward. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'll share.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes below, so everyone can reach out and connect with you. Yeah. We're almost up of time. I've got one final question that we ask sort of all our guests. What's the one change you expect to see in this region over the next 12 to 18 months that leaders need to prepare for?
That's a great question.
Take your time.
Yeah. I hadn't actually thought of an answer to that one. So, well, an observation, I think, because obviously I have, I'm from the UK, like you guys. I spend time in that market. I think one thing that's not always understood, perhaps there, about what's happening here, is the speed at which things are going. So you're going to see this region, and particularly I think UAE, as a real centre of AI, a lot of startups, scale-ups, companies growing here. It's going to become an economic global hub of that. And you're going to see that having a global impact, I think, over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I read the other day, and I can completely get this, that we will soon have the first billion-dollar valued company that only has 10 employees. Mm-hmm. And how's that going to happen through agentic AI, for example? So I think that world is coming, and particularly it's moving in this region, which is very exciting.
Yeah, I feel like the government does a very good job of being an enabler of that. You definitely feel it in being in region in the UAE that the government.
I think that the great thing about here is the stability we have, and the vision and the consistent progress towards that vision, and it gives a very stable environment and high investor confidence to invest and for companies to move, because they know that the guardrails are there, the help is there. So I think that's a great thing about this region.
Yeah, I think the other thing I've noticed anyway in the last couple of years is the organisations here, they've got this opportunity. They it may have been that they've been set in their ways for many years, but they've got this opportunity to leap 10 years forward in a very short space of time. And I think most organisations here and most leaders here are taking it, as in they're taking the chance. They are taking the chance. And I believe that leap is possible because of things like what you mentioned, the government, the stability, the startups that you've got in this region as well, and things like even just the infrastructure. We're going to have one of the biggest GPU centers in other than in the US. This is going to be a match basically of the US. Look how big the US is. Look at the UAE. It's not, it's probably a state, I would say, probably maybe 2 states. That's how big the UAE is. So it's phenomenal amounts of investment that are going in to leapfrog the organizations within this region into a place where they can compete with Europe, they can compete with the US. That's what I believe anyway.
Yeah, and there's a lot of meetups. I think the UAE does a good job of networking, and I recommend anyone listening to find your local network, go meet people. More than most places, people are open to sharing ideas and experiences here. That's how we met each other at a networking event.
Yeah.
Now lifelong friends, mate. Richard, thanks so much for having you on. It's
You're welcome.
been a great conversation. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add.
No,
Si?
it's been an absolute pleasure, Richard. Absolute pleasure.
And a great pleasure from me as well. So thank you very much for the invite and the conversation, guys.
Brilliant. Thanks for coming down.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Cheers, mate. All good?
We're done.
Yeah.
Inshallah.
You have 10 minutes. It's fine.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
That was brilliant.
Yeah,
Richard.
good.
It's all